In every age, there are those who dream of more, of empires that stretch to the horizon, of heroes who defy fate itself, of ideas powerful enough to outlive their creators. From forgotten ruins to the birth of nations, from the dust of history to the fire of human ambition, this is the story of us. A story written in courage, conquest, and the endless search for meaning. You're watching Thiegemaker, where history lives, and the past speaks once more. Act I, the dawn of Greece, the birth of a civilization. It began more than 3,000 years ago, in a land of rugged mountains and scattered islands, surrounded by a restless sea. This was Greece, not yet a nation, but a collection of people bound by myth, ambition, and a hunger to understand the world. While the pyramids of Egypt reached for heaven, and the cities of Mesopotamia glimmered on their rivers, Greece was still young, a land where legend met history, and where stories would one day shape an entire civilization. Long before the name Greece was ever spoken, there were the Minoans. The Minoan legacy. Around 2000 BC, on the island of Crete, the Minoans built something extraordinary. Their cities, Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, were vibrant centers of trade and culture. Their ships ruled the Aegean Sea, connecting Crete to Egypt, Anatolia, and beyond. They built multi-story palaces filled with colorful frescoes. They had running water, advanced drainage systems, and art that celebrated life, not war. In their paintings, we see dancers, bull leapers, and open courtyards where light poured in. The Minoans worshipped nature, the bull, the snake, the goddess of fertility. And though we cannot read their language, linear A, their culture whispers through time. This was the first great civilization of the Greek world. But no civilization lasts forever. Around 1450 BC, something changed. Perhaps it was a volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, perhaps an invasion. Whatever the cause, the palaces burned, the frescoes faded, and the Minoan age came to an end. From the ashes, new conquerors emerged, the Mycenaeans. The Age of Heroes. Around 1600 BC, the Mycenaeans rose on the Greek mainland, fierce warriors who built stone fortresses and lived for glory. They borrowed from the Minoans, art, writing, trade, but gave it a harder edge. Their kings ruled from citadels like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. Massive walls of stone, so large that later generations would call them Cyclopean, believing only giants could have built them. Their society was built for war. Bronze armor, chariots, swords, everything spoke of conquest. They traded across the Mediterranean, fought in foreign lands, and left behind treasures of gold. It was the Mycenaeans who may have inspired the legends of Agamemnon, Menelaus, and Odysseus, heroes whose tales of courage and betrayal echoed across centuries. And then came Troy, the Trojan War, myth or memory. Sometime around 1200 BC, the Greeks of Mycenae are said to have waged war on the city of Troy, across the Aegean in Asia Minor. Whether this war truly happened is still debated, but its story, immortalized in Homer's Iliad, would shape the soul of Greek identity forever. It wasn't just a story of war. It was about pride, love, fate, and the will of the gods. It was about human greatness and human failure, and it left behind a timeless idea that glory achieved through struggle would outlive death itself. But even heroes fall. Around 1100 BC, the Mycenaean world collapsed. Palaces burned, writing disappeared, and Greece fell into a shadow, a period historians call the Greek Dark Age. For centuries, the light of civilization flickered. Villages replaced cities. Trade ceased. The stories of old were passed down by word of mouth, the only connection to a forgotten age. And yet, through darkness, something survived: memory. The Greeks remembered their heroes, their gods, their sense of destiny. They began again, smaller, humbler, but determined. From these scattered roots, a new world was about to emerge, a world that would redefine freedom, knowledge, and human potential. The dawn had passed. Now came the light. Act 2. The Age of City-States, the Rise of Democracy and Empire. By 800 BC, Greece was reborn. The Dark Age had ended. Trade returned. Writing returned, now in a new form, the Greek alphabet. And across the Aegean, small communities began to flourish. But these were not united under one king or empire. They were independent city-states, polis, each with its own laws, customs, and ambitions. Among them, two would rise above all: Sparta and Athens. Sparta, the warrior state. Deep in the Peloponnesian Peninsula lay Sparta, a society unlike any other in human history. Every aspect of Spartan life was dedicated to one purpose: strength. When a child was born, elders inspected the infant. If the baby was deemed weak or sickly, it was left to die. If strong, the boy would be raised not by his parents, but by the state. At age 7, Spartan boys entered the agoge, a brutal training system that taught discipline, endurance, and obedience. They learned to steal food, to fight in silence, to endure pain without flinching. By adulthood, they were soldiers, warriors whose loyalty belonged not to family, but to Sparta itself. Women, too, were trained to be strong, to bear strong children, to manage estates while men fought. Spartans rarely built art, music, or literature. They built soldiers. For centuries, Sparta was feared. Their army was small but unstoppable. At its peak, one Spartan could stand against 10 men and win. Athens, the birth of freedom. North of Sparta, a very different city began to rise: Athens. Unlike Sparta, Athens embraced trade, philosophy, and art. It was a city of thinkers, craftsmen, and dreamers. But in its early days, Athens was ruled by kings, then by aristocrats, the rich few who controlled power. The poor struggled under debt and injustice, until one man changed everything. Around 594 BC, Solon, a wise reformer, introduced laws that freed dead slaves, gave citizens more voice, and laid the foundation for what would one day become democracy. A century later, another leader, Cleisthenes, reorganized Athenian society, breaking up the old aristocratic families and giving power to ordinary citizens. It was revolutionary. For the first time in human history, the people, not kings, had a say in their own destiny. The idea of democracy was born. The Persian threat. But freedom always comes at a cost. To the east lay the mighty Persian Empire, a vast realm stretching from India to Egypt, ruled by kings who demanded tribute and obedience. In 490 BC, Persian King Darius I sent his army to crush the defiant Greeks. They landed on the plains of Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. The Athenians were outnumbered, 10 to 1. And yet, against all odds, they charged. Their hoplites, heavily armored citizen soldiers, broke the Persian line. It was a stunning victory. A runner was sent from Marathon to Athens to deliver the news. He ran until he reached the city walls, gasped, "We have won," and collapsed dead. From that legend, we get the word Marathon. But Persia would return. 10 years later, Xerxes, son of Darius, led a colossal invasion. Hundreds of thousands of men, fleets of ships, bridges built over seas. The Greeks were divided. Many surrendered, others fled. But a few chose to stand and fight. The stand at Thermopylae. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, 300 Spartans under King Leonidas made their stand. Facing an army of millions, they fought to the last man, buying precious time for Greece to unite. Though they died, their courage inspired the world. And soon, their sacrifice bore fruit. At Salamis, the Athenian navy lured the Persian fleet into a trap, narrow straits where their numbers counted for nothing. The Greeks struck hard, burning and sinking ship after ship. When the smoke cleared, the Persian invasion was broken. Against all odds, the free cities of Greece had triumphed over the greatest empire of their time. The Golden Age of Athens. With victory came confidence and ambition. Athens emerged as the leader of a new alliance, the Delian League, a network of Greek cities united under Athenian leadership. At first, it was a defense pact. Soon, it became an empire. Under Pericles, Athens reached its golden age. The city flourished with wealth and culture. The Parthenon rose over the Acropolis, a marble temple to Athena, shining in the sun. Philosophers like Socrates walked its streets, asking dangerous questions about truth and virtue. Playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides wrote tragedies that explored the human soul. Artists, architects, and scientists turned Athens into the intellectual heart of the world. But even golden ages cast shadows. Power breeds envy, and the other cities of Greece began to fear Athens's growing dominance. Among them, none feared or hated Athens more than Sparta. And so, the stage was set for one of history's greatest civil wars, a war that would destroy the very freedom the Greeks had fought so hard to protect. Act 3. The fall of the Greek world, the Peloponnesian War and the rise of Macedon. For half a century, Athens had stood as the beacon of Greek power and culture, a shining example of democracy, intellect, and art. But as Athens grew rich from trade and tribute, her neighbors saw not beauty, but arrogance. To many Greeks, Athens was no longer a liberator, but an empire. And across the Peloponnesus, Sparta watched. The war begins. In 431 BC, tension boiled into war, the Peloponnesian War, Athens and her allies against Sparta and hers. It was not just a clash of armies, but a clash of ideals. Athens, democratic, maritime, open to new ideas. Sparta, disciplined, militaristic, closed and conservative. The war would last nearly 30 years. At first, Athens relied on her navy, while Sparta ravaged the lands around the city. The Athenians hid behind their walls, confident that their ships would bring them victory. But then came something no strategy could stop: disease. A deadly plague swept through Athens, killing 1 in 3 citizens, including its greatest leader, Pericles. The city was thrown into chaos. Still, the war dragged on. Victories came and went, at land, at sea, and in faraway colonies. All the while, the very ideals that defined Greece, unity, freedom, reason, began to crumble. The fall of Athens. In 415 BC, Athens made a desperate gamble. They launched a massive expedition to Sicily, hoping to strike at Sparta's allies and secure new resources. But the campaign was a disaster. Their fleet was destroyed, their soldiers slaughtered or enslaved. The once mighty Athenian navy, the pride of the city, was gone. 8 years later, the Spartans, backed by Persian gold, besieged Athens itself. Starved and broken, the city surrendered in 404 BC. For the first time in history, democracy had fallen, not to kings, but to fellow Greeks. Sparta was now supreme. But its victory brought no peace. Greece was exhausted, her cities weakened, her people divided, her pride shattered. The Peloponnesian War had destroyed what made Greece strong, her unity and her faith in herself. And in the shadows to the north, another power watched, waiting: the rise of Macedon. To most Greeks, Macedonia was a backwater, a rugged land of tribes and kings, half Greek, half barbarian. But under King Philip II, Macedonia transformed. Philip was not just a warrior. He was a strategist, a diplomat, and a visionary. He reformed the Macedonian army, creating the phalanx, a wall of spears that moved like a machine. He built alliances, crushed rivals, and slowly brought all of Greece under his influence. Not through philosophy, but through force. By 338 BC, at the Battle of Kyrenia, Philip's armies defeated the combined forces of Athens and Thebes. Greece was conquered, not destroyed, but absorbed into a new order. Yet Philip's ambitions went beyond Greece. He dreamed of invading the Persian Empire, to avenge the old Greek wars and unite East and West under one rule. But before he could, he was assassinated, cut down by a blade at his daughter's wedding. His dream might have died with him, if not for his son, a boy of just 20 years, brilliant, restless, and destined to change the world. His name was Alexander. Act 4. The Age of Alexander, the Empire and the Legacy. When Alexander became king in 336 BC, few could have imagined what he would achieve. He inherited a powerful army, disciplined, loyal, and trained to perfection. He inherited his father's dream, to conquer Persia. But Alexander had no intention of merely fulfilling his father's ambition. He intended to surpass it, to become not just a king, but a legend. Conquest of Persia. In 334 BC, Alexander led 40,000 men across the Hellespont into Asia. At the shore, he leapt from his ship, hurled a spear into the soil, and declared, "I accept this land from the gods as a gift for conquest." His first major test came at the Battle of Granicus, where his forces shattered the Persian satraps. Then came Issus, where he faced King Darius III himself, and won, capturing Darius's family and treasure. But Alexander was not content with victory. He marched south, taking the great cities of the east one by one. Tyre, after a brutal 7-month siege. Gaza, Egypt. In Egypt, he was welcomed as a liberator. There, he founded a new city, Alexandria, which would become one of the greatest centers of learning and culture in human history. Then, in 331 BC, Alexander met Darius again, this time at Gaugamela, in modern Iraq. Outnumbered 5-1, Alexander's tactics and discipline triumphed. The Persian army collapsed. Darius fled, and soon after, was killed by his own men. At just 25 years old, Alexander had conquered the largest empire the world had ever seen. But he was far from finished. To the edge of the world, Alexander marched east, across deserts, mountains, and rivers, into lands no Greek had ever seen. He defeated kings in Central Asia, married a local princess named Roxana, and began to blend Greek and Eastern cultures. In his mind, he was not just a conqueror. He was a creator of a new world, one people under one rule. But ambition has a cost. In India, Alexander's army, weary and far from home, faced fierce resistance. At the Battle of the Hydaspes River, they fought the Indian king Porus, whose war elephants terrified the Macedonian horses. It was one of Alexander's hardest battles, and though he won, his men had had enough. At the banks of the Hyphasis River, his soldiers refused to march farther. For the first time, the man who had conquered the world was forced to turn back. Alexander wept, not for what he had lost, but for what he could no longer conquer. The death of a god. Returning west, Alexander planned new campaigns, Arabia, perhaps even Rome, but fate had other plans. In 323 BC, in the palace of Babylon, Alexander fell ill after a night of fever and exhaustion. He was 32 years old. As his generals gathered, they asked who should succeed him. He whispered, "To the strongest." And then, the greatest conqueror in history was gone. His death unleashed chaos. Without an heir, his empire shattered into fragments, ruled by his generals, known as the Diadochi. They fought for decades, carving out kingdoms from Egypt to Persia. But Alexander's legacy could not be divided. The Hellenistic world. In the centuries that followed, Greek culture, Hellenism, spread farther than ever before. From the shores of the Mediterranean to the mountains of Afghanistan, Greek art, language, and philosophy blended with Eastern traditions. Cities like Alexandria, Antioch, and Pergamon became centers of science and learning. Mathematicians like Euclid and Archimedes redefined geometry and physics. Philosophers like Epicurus and Zeno explored the nature of happiness, virtue, and destiny. Greek influence shaped everything, from art to astronomy, from medicine to politics. Even when Rome rose to power, it inherited Greece's legacy. As the poet Horace would later write, Greece, though conquered, took her conqueror captive. The eternal